we had problems of the tea garden laborers, whose identities were not quite acknowledged as part of scheduled tribes or something like. Some people, like some communities like the Bodos, felt a little underrepresented in the larger decision-making sectors. In Nagaland, you had problems of Naga communities which were there in other states, which is not in Nagaland. And that fueled a certain insurgency. So these loose ends of a larger process of actually preserving the identity were there. And all of these were complicated by a feeling that the development process in India hadn't reached into every corner of the Northeast. And I think one of the most reassuring parts today is that, to the large extent, I don't want to make a deterministic comparison, but I would like to suggest that the greater investments which have been witnessed in the infrastructure and other parts of the Northeast, and a sense of feeling of that it belongs not only to the mainstream, it is the mainstream. That there is no difference between the Northeast and the mainstream. That the Northeast constitutes the mainstream. That political articulation has helped in a lot of ways in creating conditions whereby local problems are bound to surface at every point, can be handled with a greater degree of reassurance. There are, of course, issues which go beyond that, which is like, for instance, the entire question of Arunachal, the border issues with China. There are some parts of Burma and Nagaland which, again, have to be worked out. The lack of a cohesive central authority in Burma has not, in Myanmar, has not helped the process. These are some outstanding processes. But what we are looking at, and which General Kalita hinted in the course of his address, is that today we are looking at a greater opportunities of the Look East policy of India, the integration of the entire economies of the Northeast with Southeast Asia, a process which had been stalled for a very long time. I mean, today we are realistically talking in terms of a possibility, and this time it's more than just a possibility, as a likelihood that the Chittagong port may actually once again be opened for the trade with the Northeast, and the boon and the bonanza that can cause to the economies of these regions. Then there will, of course, be the question of whether manufacturing industry today has a future in the Northeast, whether manufacturing in the older way, some which was based on fossil fuels, which again is a more contentious global aspect, or whether we are now talking in terms of a very, very different model, perhaps a model which Sikkim has taken up. That is a model which is thinking. We are talking in terms of tourism in a different sort of way, ecotourism. But all of these, the investment and the political will and the local impetus that calls for, I think, is far more. And lastly, I would like to mention today that gone are the days when a politician or a leader from any of the northeastern states would find themselves a stranger in Delhi. I think today we are in a situation where, whether it's from Assam, whether it's from Meghalaya, or whether it's from Arunachal, you have politicians who carry equal amount of clout as any regional leader would do in any other part of the India. And I think that marks a fundamental change in the overall atmospherics in which the Northeast is looked at. And I think that's why it's very important that people like you who are occupying important positions in the strategic, in the border states and others are sensitized sometimes to the larger role of the Northeast in the Indian polity, and that it today occupies a centrality which may hitherto in the past have been lacking. And I think it's this change which, carried over for the next 25, 30 years, will see a fundamental transformation. And therefore, that distinction between the Northeast and the mainstream will, I think, will be totally obliterated. Northeast will be the mainstream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We will now begin with the first session of this panel discussion. The session will be chaired by Shri Wasbir Hussain, Editor-in-Chief, Northeast Live. Shri Hussain is a strategic analyst, political commentator, and executive director of Guwahati-based think tank, Center for Development and Peace Studies. A journalist for more than 3.5 decades, he has held senior editorial positions in many regional and national media organizations. A two-time member of India's National Security Advisory Board, Shri Hussain has authored and edited several books on peace, development, and security issues focusing on Northeast India. Ladies and gentlemen, the first speaker of this session is Professor David R. Syirmlieh. Professor David is an academician and former chairman of Union Public Service Commission. He is an alumnus of St. Edmund's College, Shillong, and has taught at St. Edmund's College and Northeastern Hill University, where he was also the Pro-Vice Chancellor. He was later appointed Vice Chancellor of Rajiv Gandhi University, Arunachal Pradesh. Professor David joined the Union Public Service Commission in 2012 and in 2017 was elevated as its chairman. In retirement since 2018, he continues to be active in delivering lectures, mentoring scholars, and conducting research. During this panel discussion, Professor David will enunciate on the topic, Contribution of Northeastern Region in India's Freedom Struggle. The second speaker is Lieutenant General Subrata Saha, Param Vishisht Seva Medal, Uttam Yudh Seva Medal, Yudh Seva Medal, Vishisht Seva Medal, and Bar. General Saha retired from the Indian Army in 2017 as Deputy Chief of Army Staff. He holds a doctorate in irregular warfare and is a distinguished fellow for the Center of Joint Warfare Studies and adjunct faculty with Indian Institute of Technology, Ropar. General Saha will speak on contribution of Indian Army in promoting integration of Northeastern region with national mainstream. I now request the three panelists to kindly come up and take their place on the stage. The chairperson, Shri Wasbir Hussain, is requested to conduct the session.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This panel discussion could not have been better timed. This is happening as the GOC-in-C, the Army Commander, as he said, that this is happening on the eve of the country at the initiative of the Assam government led by Chief Minister Dr. Himanta Biswa Sharma celebrating or getting ready to celebrate the 400th birth anniversary of one of India's iconic military generals, Lachit Borphukan, who, as the head of the Ahom army, managed to defeat the invading Mughals. The Mughal force was highly superior, sent by Aurangzeb to conquer Assam, and he halted and managed to drive back the Mughals. That was in the 17th century. And that battle, that largely naval battle, was fought near where we are sitting today, that is on the banks of the Brahmaputra, around the Saraighat River, around the Saraighat Bridge in the Brahmaputra. And perhaps had Lachit Borphukan not defeated the Mughals, perhaps, who knows, the Ahom dynasty may not have continued till 1826, when, of course, the Treaty of Yandabu and so on, it came under British occupation. So that is the backdrop in which we are discussing or sitting to discuss today. And I have got two very, very distinguished panelists whose introduction has already been given. And the topics which they are going to present is extremely significant. One, the contribution of Northeast's role in India's freedom struggle, or for that matter, in nation building, and role of the army in promoting integration of Northeastern region with the national mainstream. Now, why is I'll just take 2 minutes before I invite the distinguished panelists to present their papers. Why is the Assam government doing this Lachit anniversary celebrations in such a mega scale? I would hazard a guess, perhaps it is because people like icons like Lachit Borphukan have remained buried in the pages of history, confined to Assam. Perhaps there is need for the nation to recognize Lachit Borphukan as a national icon. He's not just an icon of Assam. He was not an Ahom general alone. He managed to defeat the invaders and protect this far eastern corner of Bharat that was in the 17th century. Therefore, these are national icons. If Chhatrapati Shivaji was battling the Mughals in Western India at that time, because Lachit Borphukan was a contemporary of Shivaji, but how many people outside the country know that? Similarly, our freedom fighters, Professor David Syirmlieh is going to speak on that. Our freedom fighters, whether it is Kuhal Kumar, whether it is Kanaklata of Assam, whether it is Tirath Singh of Meghalaya, whether it is Bir Tikendra Singh in Manipur, and so on and so forth, whether it is Rani Gaidilu, who was recognized by the Indian government later. How many people outside the country know? But that doesn't mean that the Northeast doesn't have a contribution. The Northeast's contribution has to be recognized, that it has to come into the national discourse. And that is the reason why I really laud the efforts of the Eastern Command to engage in this kind of a discussion, because generally speaking, one would not have expected the army to have such kind of a seminar and discuss, but it is indeed a laudable effort, and therefore this is very, very significant. And secondly, the contribution of the Indian Army in promoting integration of Northeastern region and national mainstream. Every one of you officers of all ranks sitting in this hall, sitting in this place today, represent India. You know, you're from different parts of India. And if these officers alone are capable of integrating the Northeast with the rest of the country, because when you have your stints here, you go back and then talk about the region, I think you are all acting as ambassadors of the Northeast, not to speak of the social welfare work that the army is doing. Army is going beyond the call of duty. If there was an accident the other day in Mizoram where a stone quarry collapsed and 13 people died, it was the army who had descended on the scene. If there is a breeze has collapsed or washed away, it is the army which is on the scene. If there is a road accident in Arunachal Pradesh, it is the army on the scene. Now, army is recognized as the symbol of the Indian state, because there are parts in the Northeast even today where food has to be airdropped. Things are going to change drastically. Of course, thanks to our Prime Minister, who has described, as the lady officer had said, as this region as the Asta Lakshmi. And he has made himself more than 50 trips to the Northeast in the past 8 years, which no prime minister had ever done before. This is something who everyone has to acknowledge. And the amount of money which is flowing, amount of funds availability for infrastructure development in the Northeastern region, particularly in the frontier areas, particularly along the border with China, is absolutely significant. And therefore, I always say, year 2022 is not 1962. We have a very, very capable and efficient army. We have the technology required. Only thing we need is the support of everybody, including each and every one of these countrymen. With these words, I first of all like to invite Professor David Reid Syirmlieh, to present his paper, Contribution of the Northeastern Region in India's Freedom Struggle. Professor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you warm greetings from the people of Northeast India, and particularly from Meghalaya, my home state, which is celebrating the 50th anniversary of its foundation. I've been requested to make a presentation today on contribution of Northeast region in India's freedom struggle. For clarity and brevity, I will read my presentation, but I would occasionally look at the audience too, and I look at the audience and I'm so profoundly happy that I've seen so many army officers today. I've never seen so many high-ranking officers in my life before. But thank you, Kublai Shibun. In Khasi, we say Kublai, thank you, and I will start my presentation. Freedom struggle. The starting point of the Mahotsav to commemorate the 75th anniversary of India's independence goes back to the national movement and the freedom struggle. The beginning of political agitation and the origins of the Indian national movement first found expression in early 19th century Bengal. In time,
खबरें अभी जारी है, लेकिन एक छोटे से ब्रेक के बाद